All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the State Senate Judiciary Committee on March 29th of 2021. Would the esteemed secretary please take the roll?
Vice Chair Cannizzaro.
She is on her way. If you would please mark her present when she arrives.
Senator Orenshaw.
Here.
Senator Harris.
Here.
Senator Settlemyre.
Here.
Senator Hansen.
Here.
Senator Pickard.
Here.
Chair Scheibel.
Here. We are also joined today by our staff members, Patrick Guinan and Nicholas Anthony, our committee counsel. And it is very nice to have him back with us since he was relegated to drafting bills for such a long time. It's a joy to have you here in committee with us. Today we have two bills to hear. I will actually be presenting both of them. So I will be turning the gavel over to the Vice Chair, Majority Leader Cannizzaro, when she gets here. And in the meantime, you will be in the very capable hands of Chair Orenshaw, who I will hand the proverbial gavel to at this time.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibel. And with that, I'd like to open the hearing on Senate Bill 258. If that's the bill you'd like to start with, Chair Scheibel, I'd like to open the hearing on Senate Bill 258. Chair Scheibel, thank you for presenting this legislation, and please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Members of the Nevada Senate Judiciary Committee, my name is Melanie Scheibel. I am the state senator from District 9 in the southwest part of Las Vegas, and it is my pleasure today to be in front of you presenting SB 258. I have with me an expert on the subject, Holly Wellborn from the ACLU, who many of you already know, and she will be walking through some background of the bill and the portions of the bill to better understand it. And then I will be here as well as members of the Nevada Department of Corrections to answer any questions, because this bill does indeed affect the Nevada Department of Corrections. The purpose of SB 258 is to require the Nevada Department of Corrections to establish some guidelines and some rules and policies to put in place in order to better serve their populations that are in their custody who are transgender, intersex, or otherwise gender diverse. It's important that we implement policies specifically targeted towards these communities so that they can be safe and treated with dignity and respect during the time that they are in the custody of the Nevada Department of Corrections. They simply face challenges, questions, problems that other members of the population, even within the Nevada Department of Corrections custody, do not face. For a long time, they have been overlooked, and many people who are incarcerated at NDOC who identify as gender diverse, as transgender, or as intersex have experienced special difficulties in adapting to life within the Nevada Department of Corrections and have not been able to receive the adequate medical care, access to commissary items, and a staff that is properly trained in their cultural competence. And so for those reasons, we feel that it is important to bring forward this measure this year, SB 258, that requires the division to update their policies and to adopt a robust policy for the treatment of transgender, gender diverse, and intersex individuals. And so I am very pleased to turn the presentation over to Ms. Wellborn, who, as I said, will give you a little bit more background on this issue and walk you through the bill.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel, and to Senator Orenshaw. My name is Holly Wellborn. I'm the Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada. I'm very pleased to be here presenting this bill to you this afternoon. I think it's important to talk about the background first and why we've decided to go down the road of ensuring that the Department of Corrections adopt certain regulations and to make that a statutory requirement with the imposition of a deadline. So let's start there. So let's talk about what it is to be transgender. A transgender person is someone whose gender identity, their internal sense of being male, female, or some other gender, is different from their sex assigned at birth. Some transgender people experience clinically significant distress as a result of the incongruence between their assigned sex and their gender identity. The medical diagnosis given to people who experience that type of distress is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a serious medical condition that often requires treatment to align the body with one's gender identity. Medically necessary treatment for gender dysphoria may include hormone therapy, gender-confirming surgery, or a multitude of other treatments. When a person is incarcerated, the need for this care does not disappear. The Constitution requires that prisons offer medically necessary care for individuals with gender dysphoria. And the courts of this jurisdiction are clear that failure to provide medically necessary treatment for gender dysphoria could result in significant injury and the unnecessary infliction of pain on an incarcerated person. And that disregarding an excessive risk to one's health and failure to provide medically acceptable care violates the Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So despite this clear Ninth Circuit case law, the Nevada Department of Corrections is behind in ensuring that their regulations are in compliance with the Ninth Circuit. We, along with our national ACLU LGBTQ rights project, our national prison project, and local transgender rights advocacy organizations, notified the Department of Corrections back in 2016 that their Medical Directive 121, which limited hormone therapy for gender dysphoria to pre-incarceration treatment, regardless of medical necessity, that's known as a freeze frame policy, was unconstitutional. There have been some adjustments to that medical directive, and while it's improved, the updates continue to suggest that at any time the Nevada Department of Corrections may discontinue or refuse to initiate treatment of hormone therapy during an individual's incarceration, regardless of medical need. And it does not make any provision for surgical treatment, regardless of medical necessity in an individual case. As stated before, the Eighth Amendment bars a prison from denying access to certain types of treatment based on a blanket policy that does not allow for medical judgment based on the individual. In addition to that medical directive, there are policies that have not been updated that are still constitutionally problematic. That includes limitations on clothing, such as undergarments, and those are denied on the basis of sex. They violate PREA standards for skin searches, allowing opposite-sex correctional officers to conduct skin searches without considering the individual's own views and with respect to their safety and more. SB 268 is necessary to impose a deadline on adopting those regulations. It is helpful to the state to avoid further litigation in the future and to bring the Nevada Department of Corrections into compliance with Ninth Circuit case law and with certain litigation settlements that have already been imposed upon the department since that decision was rendered. So now I will quickly, it's a very simple bill that it provides for some definitions, but in section 5 of the bill, starting on line 14 of page 2, it's very straightforward and requires the Department of Corrections to adopt regulations that apply the generally accepted standards of care and best practices for the supervision, custody, care, security, housing, and medical and mental health treatment of offenders. It requires that they use respectful language and currently accepted terminology that accounts for and protects the rights of the incarcerated person, and prohibits discrimination against individuals who are transgender, gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, and intersex. But perhaps the most important component of this bill is the deadline imposed in section 8 on page 3, line 14, line 17, that imposes a deadline of January 1st, 2022. It also provides for training and cultural competency for interacting with transgender individuals. That is a need of the department that we believe should be statutory. And that deadline is critical in order to force the department to comply with Ninth Circuit case law, with settlements that they are engaged in, and to protect the dignity and rights of transgender incarcerated individuals. So with that, that's my very straightforward, simple presentation. I can take any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wellborn, and thank you, Chair Scheibel, for presenting this legislation. Members, any questions? I see a question, Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Senator and Ms. Wellborn, for presenting this. And Ms. Wellborn, since you're the expert on this, I want to, I'm not antagonistic to the idea here. I think that we should always treat people, no matter their setting, in or out of prison, in any situation, with respect, and to afford them the dignity of they have a right to that. So I want to split some hairs for the purpose of making sure the record is clear. For example, you said the Eighth Amendment guarantees or prohibits lack of medical care. And the reality is the Eighth Amendment doesn't say anything about medical care. That comes from a case. And so I don't know how many cases you have referred to, because you just referred to the Ninth Circuit. And my guess is there's probably several cases. Can you tell us what those cases are?
And Ms. Welborn, certainly, if you don't have them handy, feel free to email us any citations after the hearing. I know things are moving fast and furious at this pace and session.
And
if you have them handy, please feel free to send them to us after.
Sure, and I can right now, Holly Wellborn, ACLU for the record. I can direct you to some case law currently, and the case that is controlling for the Ninth Circuit is Edmo versus Corazon. It's a case that comes out of Idaho and the Idaho Department of Corrections. The disposition of that case, it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they denied cert. And so currently the standing law is under Corazon. And what that case determines, it goes through a very lengthy analysis of what we refer to as the deliberate indifference standard, that when the Department of Corrections or any institution violates, is deliberately indifferent to a medical necessity, that there's been they've shown that a course of treatment is medically unacceptable, that a person's, that it's been shown that it's medically unacceptable under the circumstances, and that the Department of Corrections or whatever other entity chose this course consciously and in conscious disregard and an excessive risk to the plaintiff's health, then they have been deliberately indifferent in violation of the Eighth Amendment. And in the Edmo case, when they applied that to the individualized circumstances of this particular plaintiff, the court found that in this case, surgical treatment was medically necessary for that individual, that she was harming herself, and that the circumstances arose to that type of care being medically necessary for Edmo in that particular case. Now, it isn't a blanket mandate, but it says that you have to look at the individualized circumstances of that particular individual in order to assess whether or not that level of care is indeed medically necessary.
All right. And so as we look at Edmo, and I'm familiar with the case, I'm no expert, it's been a while since I've read it. It was a while ago, but my understanding is that that had to do with an individual for sex reassignment surgery. And the Department of Corrections there thought that was, as I recall, it wasn't medically necessary under the definition, and this is what I'm driving at, is what do we define as medically necessary? Because the two things that I've heard from the medical community is an argument as to that. But they had found, or Idaho had said, that this isn't, there's no emergency, there's no harm if this person's gender isn't physically changed. And yet he had a doctor who said that he would suffer irreparable harm if it wasn't. And that was the basis for the Ninth Circuit. So, but there's still apparently an open question as to what is medically necessary. So let me first start with the question of who assigns, or how is gender assigned at birth?
And pardon me, Senator Pickard, I know we've got at least one more question in the queue. So if you just boil down your question to just, exactly what you're asking, then we've got at least one other question.
Sure.
This is Senator Scheibel. I think I can address Senator Pickard's question, and Holly Wellborn may be able to address it as well. But I think your question boils down to, what does it mean for something to be medically necessary? And it is a term of art. And it is a term that has definitions within Nevada law already and within the broader medical community. I think that you sit on Commerce and Labor, where I presented a similar bill about covering procedures for people who are transgender through their health insurance policy. And medical necessity has been defined most recently, or I think most, what's the word I'm looking for, comprehensively by the WPATH standard, and I'd be happy to share that with this committee. And the WPATH standard outlines the things that make something medically necessary in terms of the difference between necessity and convenience and necessity versus desire, and outlines about 5 different factors that say that a person who does not receive this treatment will continue to experience the negative effects of whatever it is that ails them, whether that be diabetes, heart disease, gender dysphoria, bipolar disorder, whatever that condition is. What the treatment that they need in order to alleviate the symptoms of the condition are medically necessary within certain boundaries. They have to be the procedures that are well established and accepted within the medical community. They have to be a procedure that the person is prepared to undergo. In these cases, often when we're talking about things like a gender affirmation surgery, a surgical intervention, definitely the definition of medically necessary would encompass a process through which that person has to meet with not just a physician who specializes in plastic surgery or general surgery, but also with a mental health professional, with a psychiatrist, with a therapist to determine whether or not something is medically necessary. We also have a definition of medically necessary that almost exactly mirrors the WPATH standard in the Medicaid, in the Nevada Medicaid policy. And so I would think that most people who are in the custody of the Nevada Department of Corrections would be subject to the Medicaid designation of medically necessary, which is pretty much what I just outlined for WPATH, requiring those certain elements be met and establishing that they are undergoing a treatment that is for a specific purpose, has been scientifically proven, and that accounts for the severity of the treatment versus the severity of the symptoms, the availability of the treatment versus the severity of the symptoms, and encourages a team of medical professionals to come to this conclusion about what would be necessary. And I do want to pass over to Ms. Wellborn, who I think can probably provide a little bit more depth on that.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Thank you, Ms. Wellborn. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. That was exactly what I was going to reference, was the WPATH standards. That is what most medical professionals who are treating a person with gender dysphoria follow. And this is a very long process. And it could be that, that surgical procedures are kind of at the end of the process that are considered once a person has gone through all of these other benchmarks. And what we're saying with this bill is that the regulation should reflect that. It should reflect, the openness. It should reflect the individualism of that particular person and what their medical needs are at that time, and ensure that treatment isn't interrupted throughout that process because it can have detrimental effects on that incarcerated individual.
Well, and thank you for that. And you're getting right to the...
One follow-up, but I do have Senator Hansen waiting. Please, one follow-up.
Thank you. One thing that, we talked about in the other hearing in Commerce and Labor was that the WPATH standard hasn't actually been adopted by the American Medical Association or by the state of Nevada. We've mirrored segments, but we seem to be stopping short of adopting that. How many people, though, are we actually talking about? How many people is going to be caught up in this?
For the record, Holly Wellborn, Policy Director, ACLU of Nevada. I know of at least 4 individuals who would be impacted by this policy, but I think that the PREA coordinator for the Nevada Department of Corrections is here, might be able to answer that question.
And I believe that if you can, and please state your name for the record, and please, if you could answer that question, that'd be great. If not, could you do you mind letting us know?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Orenshaw. For the record, Deborah Strickland, Nevada Department of Corrections Agency PREA Coordinator. Right now, we have probably about 50 inmates who have self-identified as transgender. Of those, I don't know how many have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. That would be a medical question, and I have to defer to Dr. Menev. I don't know if he's present today.
Thank
Right,
you.
well, we're talking somewhere between 4 and 50. That, for my purposes, that's probably a good enough answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pickard, and thank you, Ms. Striplin. I understand you're here to speak later on the bill. I have a question from Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Vice Chair Orenthal. Actually, a new question. Senator Pickard actually got a couple of them covered for Ms. Striplin. Ms. Striplin, right now, if they are transgender and their biological sex is male, do you guys put them in the female correction facilities and vice versa?
For the record, Deborah Striplin, Nevada Department of Corrections, Agency PREA Coordinator. Currently, by the Prisoner Rape Elimination Act standards, we do case-by-case reviews as requested by a transgender person to be incarcerated. At this time, we do not have anybody housed at the women's facility that is a trans female, but we have done approximately 10 reviews on a case-by-case to consider them for housing at the female facility.
Okay, thank you very much. And my next question actually goes to legal. I need to know, this would be Anthony, of course, under section 5.2, can you tell me the legal definition of transgender, gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, and intersex, so we can get it on the record, and so in the future we know exactly what we're talking about, please?
I hate to interrupt Mr. Anthony, but this is Melanie Scheibel for the record, and those terms are all defined within the bill. That's sections 2, 3, and 4, starting on line 4 of page 2.
Thank you very much.
They're not all defined, and I'd frankly like to get it on the record from our legal person to say what specifically in Nevada law we're going to be addressing when these specific terms are used.
And I believe that, as the chair stated, Senator Hansen, those are, they are defined in the text of the legislation. I'm not sure if there's any additional information that Mr. Anthony can provide, but if there is, I'm happy to defer to Mr. Anthony if there's any information that you can provide, but I believe that they are defined here in the text of the legislation.
Is there a definition? I'm looking for transgender right now. I don't see it. Maybe I overlooked it, but transgender, I do see gender nonconforming, gender non-binary. I don't see intersex, though. Intersex and transgender, are they legal terms? Because I don't see those definitions here unless I'm overlooking it.
I see intersex in section 4, a condition in which a person is, Melanie Scheibel for the record, a senator from District 9. A condition in which a person is born with external genitals, internal reproductive organs, chromosome patterns, or an endocrine system that does not conform to the traditional gender binary of male and female. I'd be happy to follow up with a definition of transgender. I am guessing that it is defined elsewhere in the Nevada revised statutes. Otherwise, it would have been included in this bill. But I can check on that.
Okay, well, I'll be happy to take that offline. Next question. When somebody is incarcerated in the prison system right now, do they have to make a declaration of what they are at the time that they come in? And also, if they do make a declaration of, say, they say I'm gender non-binary, is that binding on them for their entire prison stay? Or is it a fluid situation? I mean, somebody can claim to be gender non-binary and then later say that they're intersex, or are these stationary things once they're actually incarcerated? And when, in fact, do they have to make this declaration?
And I think that might be a question for Ms. Striplin, unless someone else wants to answer it, but I think that might be a question for Ms. Striplin from Nevada Department of Corrections.
For the record, Deborah Striplin, Nevada Department of Corrections, Agency PREA Coordinator. Currently, by the PREA standards, we do an assessment. We're required to ask all incoming inmates how they identify. Whether it's transgender. Intersex is more of a medical term. That's somebody whose chromosomal patterns don't match, so that's more of a medical term. It's not that they identify, they're born that way. So if someone identifies as transgender, it is fluid. They can change if they no longer identify as transgender and want to be identify as maybe bisexual or gender nonconforming. We do leave that fluid, and they can change it at any time as they choose.
That's interesting. Yeah, and that doesn't see you don't see that as any kind of a major administrative problem down the road, that some prisoner can literally claim one sexual thing at one point, 6 months later claim another one, and 6 months later claim another one. I mean, that's the problem with part of this stuff, is like it's not, you can't come into the prison system and claim you're white and then later claim you're black or something, because those are obvious characteristics. Sexual characteristics, it seems to me, are in fact fluid. I'm kind of wondering, we're placing a tremendous burden on you, Ms. Striplin, frankly, to make all these determinations and then not get sued, and up to you, of course, to set up medical teams of healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals, all of which have to come into the prison system and do evaluations on these people, when in fact the individuals are able to later change what they felt at the time that the original claim was made. I mean, frankly, I just think this is putting way too much burden on the Department of Corrections in some exceptionally fluid situations. So, well, Mr. Vice Chair, thank you very much. I've got a ton of questions, but I don't want to tie up all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. I see Senator Settlemyre.
Trying to make sure I'm unmuted. Sorry about that, Mr. Vice Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. Like Senator Hansen, I can't find a definition in NRS anywhere of transgender. I'm just curious, how does this bill potentially going to work with other legislation that we have talking about solitary confinement? Because isn't it common with individuals with intersex of transgenderness, don't we generally put them in a solitary confinement for their own protections in many respects, Director?
I think Ms. Striplin, the PREA coordinator, or Ms. Welborn, or whoever would like to answer that.
Holly Wellborn, Policy Director, ACLU of Nevada. I can take a first crack at this question. So yes, there are many transgender individuals who are placed in either protective custody, administrative segregation, or some level of segregation within the prison system. And it's a major problem because, especially when there are freeze frame policies in place, it gets in the way of a person being able to progress through their needed medically necessary therapies in order to dive through, whatever they need from a therapeutic standpoint to determine whether or not they are eligible for whether it's hormone therapy, whether it's a surgical procedure. And by stalling that process, we do end up leaving people in an isolation cell for extended periods of time. So until a person can progress through that, they will remain in isolation until there's new policies that are put in place. And so that's why it's imperative that we allow a person to seek the medical care that they need.
I appreciate that. If I could have a follow-up,
Please go ahead.
Mr. Vice Chairman. In that respect, have there been any studies done showing decrease or how it affects individuals once they have the surgery, whether or not, they have to have less, care, psychologically, or do they need more? Has there been any studies in that respect? I mean, we've heard, obviously we have people sending us tons of emails showing studies both ways. So I was just wondering if there's anything from the American Journal of Psychiatry that might be able to be looked at to figure this stuff out. And if so, if you could send it to us.
This is Melanie Scheibel, for the record, to you, Senator Settlemyre, through the chair, sitting chair Orenshaw. And I can certainly provide you with some of those resources that do indicate that people who receive proper treatment experience fewer medical issues, and those are often psychosocial issues. And so that's, my fancy way of saying that somebody who is incarcerated, who identifies as transgender and is not getting the treatment that they need, is likely very irritable. They might have issues with rage. They likely are not getting along with other people who they are incarcerated with. They might be fighting with guards. They're probably extremely depressed. We've seen cases of people who engage in self-harm, and when they get treatment, those things stop. They don't, it's not a 180 the very next day, there are no more problems, but by regulating people's emotional health through the treatment of their gender dysphoria, we do see that they become able to interact with other people who are in custody. They are able to listen to guards better. They are able to engage in the programming that the Department of Corrections offers. And so that's why I want to remind the committee also that this is not, first of all, this is a broad mandate to NDOC. It doesn't say you have to cover this you have to cover this surgery and you have to provide these hormones. It says you have to have a policy. You have to come up with some rules of the game for people who are entering the Nevada Department of Corrections custody who have these particular needs. And that means that there are going to be different needs of different people. We're not talking about taking every single person in NDOC custody who identifies in any way as gender nonconforming or non-binary and offering them surgery. We're talking about maybe there are a few who need actual surgical sex reassignment or gender affirmation surgery in order to treat their symptoms. But for some of them, it might just be a meeting with a counselor once a week. It might just be having access to tampons at the commissary, even though they're housed in the men's prison, so that they're not bleeding into their garments while they are in custody. Things like that, that we aren't talking about on a broad scale, we can do at very low cost to the prison. They're not huge burdens to the administrative side of things, but they are incredibly important projects and incredibly important steps to take for the people who are actually in custody, who are actually suffering.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibel. And yes, that would be great if you can share that with Senator Settlemyre and the rest of the committee. Looks like I have Senator Hansen for a second.
Thanks. My question actually goes to Ms. Striplin. We just kind of got a perspective that apparently the Nevada Department of Corrections does not have a current policy. And if you do have a current policy, was it reviewed by any of these bill sponsors? And where is the lack of conformity between your current policy and the policy required in this new law, assuming it passes?
For the record, Deborah Striplin, Nevada Department of Corrections Agency PREA Coordinator. Currently, we do have a policy. The national PREA standards that were released in August of 2012 provided guidelines that we are required to follow through the Department of Justice for the PREA law. So we do follow multiple guidelines. We do have a policy, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act policy. The only, and for the record, Department of Corrections is neutral on this bill. Currently, we do maintain the majority of the definitions that are listed in this bill. The only one in reviewing this bill that we don't have in current policy is gender non-binary, which that's easy if we need to fix that. We also have training requirements that were provided to address communicating effectively with all inmates to include LGBTI offenders. The Prison Rape Elimination Act guidelines came out, and so some of these very same things that are in this bill we have already been addressing for almost 8 years now.
Wow, so you've already been doing these policies for 8 years, and the only issue in this bill that's new actually is binary stuff. Did anybody actually in the bill sponsorship get a hold of you or the Department of Corrections to make sure that the bill actually was not simply repetitive of policies that are already in place?
I'd be happy to take this question.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll go ahead and let you have that question, then I've got someone else in the queue.
Very
Yes.
good. I asked Ms. Striplin the question, so I'd like an answer from her.
Well, you asked a question about the bill sponsor, and I'm the bill sponsor. This is Senator Scheibel.
No, I asked the Department of Corrections if anybody from them had been contacted by you guys.
And Senator Hansen, I'm going to go to the sponsor, Chair Scheibel, and then we can go to Ms. Striplin, or she'll also be testifying a neutral testimony as well. Chair Scheibel.
Thank you, Chair. And again, for the record, this is Melanie Scheibel, Senate District 9, and the sponsor of SB 258. I did reach out to the Nevada Department of Corrections. I have had several meetings with members of the Nevada Department of Corrections administrative team. I have not had the pleasure of meeting with Ms. Striplin one-on-one. I have met with Director Daniels about this issue. I have met with him and requested that a written policy be put into place in the Nevada Department of Corrections that specifically addresses the needs of transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary, and other people in their custody. And it does not currently exist in a form that is robust and in a form that is as specific as this bill, and that's why I brought the bill forward.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. But I would point out the Department of Corrections has had this policy in place by their own testimony today since 2012. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Senator Hansen, I believe Ms. Wellborn. Please go ahead, Ms. Wellborn.
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. Holly Wellborn, Policy Director, ACLU of Nevada, for the record. I want to point out that, yes, there is a policy, Administrative Regulation 494, that used to delineate every aspect that we're talking about today. Since then, that policy had been gutted and then now refers to, I believe it's 8 different administrative regulations and Medical Directive 121. So in our review of this, and when we've gone to the Board of Prison Commissioners meetings and have testified at those meetings, to ensure that the policies do come into compliance with Ninth Circuit case law and with best practices standards, they are still falling short. And we have several letters. We have letters to the Department of Correction dating back from 2016, one as soon as 2017, and we testified at the last Board of Prison Commissioners meeting when this subject was on the agenda. I'm happy to send all of that correspondence to the committee for your records and for background. We had pointed out on numerous occasions the insufficiency of existing policies. So while there are policies that exist, there are issues with them. And so, for example, the medical directive still provides for skin screenings by opposite sex correctional staff without considering whether or not that is appropriate for that particular individual. And from our perspective, that is PREA non-compliant, and we've testified on the record at the Board of Prison Commissioners meetings to that effect. Then there are several other policies that have not been updated since, and those are the administrative regulations that the current AR 494 refers to, that have not been updated since 2015, that address things like access to, clothing, undergarments, different, needs that that particular individual might have, that need to be updated and that haven't been updated. So I would say the department is behind in updating those policies with current standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Vice Chair, I just want to get on the record that I'd like to hear from the department. I know they're in neutral position, but the impression I got is that they have a humane policy in place now and that there has been no lawsuits by the ACLU or others to force them to try to reach some new level of compliance. And in fact, they've done a remarkable good job under the circumstances. So anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you for the question. And I do believe that we have one more question in the queue, and then I think we'll have Department of Corrections also testifying in the neutral position. So Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Senator. My concern is this, that there seems to be some discussion, we just heard Ms. Wellborn touch on it, that the regulations that are in place don't meet the standards that some would like. However, they've been through the regulatory process and were approved by the Legislative Commission at some point. And so we're putting on them the responsibility to presumably follow some standard. And the bill speaks to some of that, although it doesn't adopt a standard. And my concern is that we're just perpetuating the same problem if we don't give them clear guidance. And if we're not following the science, and this, one of the emails I got was, when it comes to the DNA tells you what the sex is. We're not talking about, we're talking about a biological fact. Now, that differs, of course. The medical community also says that there is such a thing as gender dysphoria. We've seen that. It's in the DSM, for Pete's sake. So what standard are we going to make the NDOC follow if it's not, biological science? This is what I'm getting at. We need to get into the details of what is the standard that they are to follow. Otherwise, we're just going to perpetuate this problem.
Pardon me. I see Ms. Welborn's hand up from the ACLU. Ms. Welborn?
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. Holly Wellborn, ACLU of Nevada, for the record. I want to go back. I will address that question, but I do want to address that there has been litigation filed against the Department of Correction for failure to come into compliance with Ninth Circuit standards, and we can't talk too much about that because I think that there's some confidentiality provisions in those settlements, but as of right now, those policies have not been changed. The last time Medical Directive 121 was updated, it was reviewed in October of 2019, and that was after the EDMO decision, but no changes were made to the Medical Directive. So the last time that the Medical Directive was updated was October 17th of 2018, and that is prior to the EDMO decision. So I want to make clear that the current directive from our perspective is not in compliance with this jurisdiction's case law. And so there do need to be tweaks and updates to it to ensure that it is. And we have been very clear about that on the record with the Board of Prison Commissioners at their meetings when this has been on the agenda. So I want to make sure that that is clear. As far as those standards, I think that is the standard. Right now, EDMO is controlling. We need to ensure that these policies, whether it be Medical Directive 121 or whether it be the other administrative regulations that are cited in Administrative Regulation 494, to ensure that that they're written in a constitutionally adequate manner. And we'll continue working with the department. The reason that the ACLU has not filed litigation at this time, when we did, and I'll send those letters to the committee after this meeting, but we did issue letters, demand letters notifying the department that these regulations were out of compliance, and that's even prior to the EDMO decision. And then, it went through a series of case law. There were some other law firms that took up those lawsuits, and there was some success with those in trying to push forward and getting these ARs in compliance with the Ninth Circuit. Thank you.
And so then, Ms. Welborn, then if this legislation passes, this would help bring Nevada into compliance with Ninth Circuit case law?
I've got a person.
That's correct.
Would you mind if I'm...
Holly Wellborn, ACLU. That is correct.
Thank you very much, Ms. Welborn. Senator Pickard, any questions?
Well, I'd like the answer to my question, and that is what standard? I mean, Ms. Welborn, I certainly appreciate your perspective. ACLU takes positions on many issues, and you win some, you lose some. Sometimes you get regulations to comply with your desires or your interpretation of whether or not something's in compliance, and sometimes you don't. But the ACLU is not the one that is going to create a standard that the NDOC then has to follow. That's our job. Or it's the commission's job to promulgate the regulations and then to make that the standard. And so what I'm hearing is that the NDOC has a standard that you don't like. But that's the standard that they're right now operating under, and this bill doesn't.
And Senator Pickard, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can hear you. I cannot hear you.
Sorry. I don't know where you lost me, but at the end of the day, the bill doesn't contain a standard. The ACLU doesn't create a binding standard on NDOC. NDOC under the commission has the regulations in place that they then have to follow. And so I don't see an end to this spiral here. If we've got to either have a standard that we live by, which it sounds like we have. The commission has has promulgated the regulations, created the standard. The ACLU doesn't like that standard, but the ACLU doesn't fix the standard. That's the commission's job. This bill doesn't have a standard in it, so how do we fix the problem?
And I apologize, but I'm just going to maybe add my question on for Ms. Welborn, whoever would like to handle it. But if we don't come into compliance with the Ninth Circuit case law, isn't there a danger that a federal master may dictate these things instead of allowing us to decide these and come into compliance? I think that would be my fear. So I'm sorry throw an additional question?
Yeah, no, they fit well. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoever would like to take a stab at that, but if not, we can.
Address this. This is Melanie Scheibel, for the record, state senator from District 9 and sponsor of SB 258. And I think that this is part of the legislative process to direct the Department of Corrections to meet a new standard, to develop a new standard which is higher than their current standard. And we could have written the bill to adopt the text of the Edmo decision, but that would just not be good policy because it doesn't account for the uniqueness of Nevada. It doesn't allow the Nevada Department of Corrections to develop a policy that fits within their other policies. And so I think that we have an understanding with the Nevada Department of Corrections. I'll note that their fiscal note, while it is 0, does indicate that they think that they will have to make a policy change in order to comply with the mandates of SB 258. They will have to start training their staff in more cultural competence if this is passed. They will have to develop a new medical directive if this is passed. And that is what I, as a member of the legislature, am asking the Nevada Department of Corrections to do. Because the current standards, I think, are deficient. I think they're both deficient legally and deficient from a policy perspective. And so with a piece of legislation, we can only do so much. I am not taking the words directly from Edmo. I am not taking the words from the WPATH. I am not taking the words from another state that I think do meet the standards of the Ninth Circuit and telling NDOC to adopt those verbatim. What I am asking them to do is to raise the level of the standards that they have for caring for and treating people with gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, gender dysphoria symptoms in a way that is better than it currently is. And the standards are set forth in Section 5. It includes the generally accepted standards of care and best practices for supervision. I think that looking to the current Ninth Circuit case law would be a great way for the department to determine what is the accepted standard of care and the best practices. I think that prohibiting discrimination has a legal definition. And so what the bill is intended to do is to raise the standard of those policies within the Nevada Department of Corrections. And I think that it would be quite foolish for the Nevada Department of Corrections to adopt a policy that doesn't also clear the bar of the Ninth Circuit case law. But technically, the bill doesn't call for it. I think, however, that it should, and I hope that it will, be used as a tool to meet that standard that is set forth in the Edmo decision and other subsequent legal jurisprudence.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a question from Senator Harris.
Thank you. I'll throw out a new term, Chair Pro Tem Orenshaw. Senator Scheibel, I don't know if this is for you or for someone at the Department of Corrections, but it seems to me that this bill is designed to raise the level of care for a few inmates. But I haven't heard anything on the record that this would be also simultaneously, let's say, require any lessened care for any other inmate or cause any harm to any other inmates. And I just want to be clear, does this bill have any negative implications for any current inmates?
I will take that one, Melanie Scheibel, for the record, Senate District 9. And certainly I hope Ms. Strickland will weigh in here as well. But I think that this is an example where it's not a zero-sum game. So no, we are not taking away care, rights, respect, dignity for anybody else in order to ensure that we are securing it for the community identified in this bill.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibel. Senator Harris, any follow-up?
No, if Ms. Strickland has a view, I'd love to hear it, but no follow-up.
And I believe, go ahead, Ms. Strickland.
For the record, Deborah Strickland, Nevada Department of Corrections Agency PREA Coordinator. I agree with Chair Scheibel. I think this enhances our current policy. It doesn't impact any other inmates. It just makes it better for those who identify as transgender, intersex, gender non-binary. I think it makes improvements, and that's why we remain neutral on the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Striplin.
Thank you. Right. If there's no other presenters, I would like to move on to others in support of the measure. And I don't think there's anyone else on Zoom, but if there is anyone else on Zoom, please turn on your camera and I'll take other folks who'd like to speak in support of the measure. Again, 2 minutes per speaker. And if there's no one on Zoom who wishes to speak in support, then broadcasting, if we can go to the phone lines for testimony in support of Senate Bill 258.
Yes, thank you, Senator Orenshaw. To testify in support on Senate Bill 258, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to give support testimony on Senate Bill 258, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 904. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Sitting Chair Orenshaw and members of the committee. My name is Alex Camberos, and today I'm speaking on behalf of Battleborn Progress in support of SB 258. The National Inmate Survey, administered by the Justice Bureau of Statistics, found that trans inmates experience high levels of sexual misconduct from staff, harassment by other inmates, and/or were physically injured by staff. Gender-diverse inmates deserve to be treated with dignity when under the custody of the state. Trans people are disproportionately subjected to mistreatment, neglect, violence, and harassment, and the Department of Corrections should establish interventions to prevent mistreatment while under custody. By establishing regulations and training for staff founded in evidence-based practices, in effective intervention and case management, with the addition of transcultural competency, we can improve the conditions for gender-diverse prisoners and prevent mistreatment. For these reasons and many more, we support SB 258. Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, caller. And for those who have just joined us this afternoon, we are currently on support testimony. We are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 936. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamila Lewis, spelled Jameelah, last name Lewis, Lewis. I'm a community advocate, activist, and I'm a PREA advocate, so my opinion does not reflect any of my agencies or that of my job. I would just like to say that I do stand in support of this bill, not only in solidarity with my trans friends and inmates who have returned home, but also with my clients that I currently do have within NDOC. I think that this bill will expand and bring them all benefits, specifically for those who are needing gender confirming surgery, specifically for those who are being harassed, specifically for those who are looking for services post-incarceration and looking for medical attention and emotional support now. I think that this bill will do I can't even say it. I don't have the words. It will do a monumental amount of great things for people who identify as trans and gender diverse. So I'm asking you, I'm not even asking you today. I am begging you that you please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And as a brief reminder, if you've currently joined us, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 148. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. And then slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Allison Rosas, ALLISON ROSAS. I am the Policy Specialist Intern for the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. I'm here today to express our support of SB 258. Transgender people face higher rates of poverty, stigma, and marginalization, and whether incarcerated or not, puts them at greater risk for sexual assault and hate-motivated violence. However, while incarcerated, LGBTQ inmates are substantially more likely to face violence and abuse more often than their cisgender counterparts. According to the U.S. Transgender Survey, transgender people are 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by other inmates in the facility and 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by staff. In addition to sexual assault, research has shown that transgender people in prison face a number of other challenges, including being denied medical care, verbal abuse, and lengthy stays in solitary confinement. This treatment can lead to higher rates of depression and mental illness, self-harm, and suicide attempts. This bill is detrimental to the physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the transgender community currently incarcerated. To protect the health and safety of transgender people in prison, it is crucial that the Department of Corrections staff receive adequate and accurate training to protect the health and safety of transgender people in prison. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 007, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Rasmussen, Lisarasmussen. I'm here today speaking on behalf of NACJ and also on behalf of my own law firm. You know, I've listened to the testimony and I've listened to the questions, and one of the misconceptions seems to be that we already have a policy and we don't need this statute. Let me tell you why we do need this statute. I actually represent, in civil rights cases, several of these trans inmates who have been raped by staff, by other inmates, and who have been denied the most basic of hormone treatment and medical care. And I'm not even talking about sexual reassignment surgery. I'm talking about basic things. Even when I've gone to visit one of them, I've had staff tell me, wait right here, Ms. Rasmussen, we'll bring him right out. And I have corrected staff and said her, because using the correct pronoun is a really basic thing. And the staff have looked at me and said, no, ma'am, this is a men's prison. Well, it happens to be my trans female client who would love to be transferred to a female prison, but she's been denied that request every single time. And then in another one of my cases, I had a client request, while her federal lawsuit was pending and still is pending, a kite. She requested a kite, which is something you request so that you can say, may I go see the doctor. She was handed a mock kite that's called a hurt feelings kite. It has a form, and it requests that she put her name in the place of where it says whiner's name, that she put the date her feelings were hurt, the time her feelings were hurt, the name of the real man who hurt her feelings. And then it said reason for leaving this report. You could check a box that says, I am thin-skinned, I am a wimp, I have woman-like hormones, I am a crybaby, I want my mommy, my feelings are easily hurt. And then it says under the narrative box, tell us in your own sissy words how your feelings were hurt. And then finally it cautions that repeatedly filling out this form might end in or result in wall-to-wall counseling, which for those of you who don't know is a military term for basically beating people into compliance. This form was given to my trans client while our federal lawsuit was pending within the last 2 years. So if any of you think that we don't have a problem, that we already have a policy, let me tell you and let me assure you that is not true. And it is certainly not the fault of Ms. Stripling. I'm sure that she would love to have the benefit of a statute that gives the Department of Correction additional guidance. But no one can say that there's no problem. There are lots of lawsuits floating around, and several of them happen to be my client. What is happening to these trans inmates in the Department of Corrections is a tragedy. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, caller. And as a reminder, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you've recently joined us and would like to provide support testimony at this time, Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 130, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINE SAUNDERS, and I'm a policy director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in support of Senate Bill 258. The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, and the Supreme Court has held that ignoring incarcerated persons' medical needs can violate this prohibition. This is only possible to be upheld when every incarcerated individual, regardless of their gender identity, is able to receive accurate and medically necessary care. And according to the American Medical Association, medically necessary services that affirm gender include gender-affirming hormone therapy, gender-affirming surgeries, non-medical social transition, and mental health supports. Although the NDOC has made updates to their medical directive, it continues to suggest that at any time they may discontinue or refuse to initiate treatment of hormone therapy during a person's incarceration, regardless of medical need. These regulations conflict with the prevailing standards of care. Senate Bill 258 is a necessary piece of legislation to oppose a deadline for NDOC to adopt regulations that comport with prevailing standards of care and to ensure that all transgender and gender nonconforming incarcerated people in Nevada have access to appropriate medical care. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 261, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Melanie Scheibel and Senate Committee on Judiciary. Thank you for this time. For the record, my name is Jasmine Margarita Tobin, T as in Tom, O, B as in boy, O, N as in Nancy. I go by Jazz. I am an organizer with Planned Parenthood Votes Nevada. Planned Parenthood Votes Nevada is in favor of SB 258. I urge you to think of the inmates sitting in our correctional facilities right now. It is no secret that transgender, gender nonconforming, and LGBTQ plus Nevadans face discrimination at the hands of correctional staff for their gender identity and expression with little to no legal protections, as was touched on by a previous caller. The trauma inflicted upon transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming inmates is avoidable with adequate training and resources. It is for this reason that I urge the Senate Committee on Judiciary to please support SB 258. Protect our transgender, gender non-conforming, and non-binary Nevadans who are incarcerated by passing this bill. Thank you all again for this time.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 144, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
My name is Jay Burkholz. That's J-B-U-R-K-H-O-L-Z. I am reading testimony from inmate Rachel Whitted, R-A-C-H-E-L, W-H-I-T-T-E-D. This has been edited for brevity and clarity. There is a lot of discrimination that transgender and women in prison have to deal with. We have to shower around male prisoners. We also get harassed all of the time by inmates and staff. They label us and put things in our file that cause us to have a problem getting a roommate. They put us in a dorm setting when out in the main yard. There are times that we are jumped or beaten because of who we are. Other prisoners pass us around and touch our body and our breasts. I was approved for sex reassignment surgery, but they told me it isn't in the Nevada Department of Corrections policies. They are basing everything on sex assigned at birth and not gender identity. They refused to let us contact and work with a speech therapist and said we cannot do virtual sessions. The prison does not consider our dysphoria or treat it as a serious medical condition. I have no lights in my cell. We are treated differently than the other prisoners. They give the main yard regular milk and give us in segregation powder milk. They won't use our chosen names. I've had staff tell me that if I am claiming to be a woman and if bad things happen, then I just have to live with it and let it go. I have been verbally and sexually harassed by inmates and staff. I've even had inmates tell me to cell up with them so they can sexually assault me. Staff will stare at us in our cell while we're sitting down using the restroom. We are not afforded basic human rights while in prison. This is my statement that I want to be brought to the community so they know the truth of what we have to deal with every day in a men's prison. Signed, Miss Rachel Marie Wooded.
Thank you, caller. As a reminder, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you've just joined us and would like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 944. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Once again, caller with the last 3 digits, 944. Please press *6 to unmute. One more time, caller with the last 3 digits, 944. Please press *6 to unmute. We will move on. My caller with the last 3 digits, 944. If you can hear me, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. My name is Nikolai Warner. That's NickOllii. Last name Warner. And I'm actually reading a testimony on behalf of an currently incarcerated individual, Daisy Meadows. That's Daisy. Last name Meadows. This testimony has also been edited for brevity and clarity. My name is Daisy Lynn Meadows, and I am an inmate in Nevada Department of Corrections custody. I am a female, as confirmed by Dr. Marvin Alviso. The effects of solitary confinement of a woman in a male's facility have devastating psychological and physical effects, well documented by social scientists, lawyers, and activists. You have to be a really strong woman in a men's facility. It is really hard on me. I often deal with things. I am so depressed and devastated. I've lost belief in myself and my abilities as my drive and confidence slips away. I cannot live with being treated as a man, classified as a man, housed with men, etc. It's daily torture being forced to be of sexual service to other inmates against my will and having to accept that it is a normality in my life, and then to be refused medical attention and treated and viewed as a joke, oftentimes locked up in solitary confinement for trying to report incidents. I still hold on to my goals and dreams of one day being a free woman, being able to get a law degree, to fight and advocate for those who are in danger and don't have a voice. I will never stop loving and caring. I'm sure some people think, why can't Daisy just pretend to be a man just to keep herself safe? I can't pretend to be a man any more than any other woman. I've attempted multiple times to have my name and gender marker changed, but have been refused and treated with hostility from NDOC and the courts. My crimes haunt me, and I have the utmost respect for my victims and their privacy. They have been put through enough and shall not have to relive what I put them through, which is why I accepted a plea bargain. I am not in any way innocent and take full responsibility for my wrongdoings and offer my sincerest apologies and regrets. I am sorry for what I did. However, being raped, beaten, physically assaulted, oppressed, tortured, harassed, and forced to be someone I am not was never a part of my sentence. For 17 days, a male cellmate repeatedly raped and tortured me in horrific ways. I was seriously injured as a result and have an anal prolapse that NDOC refused to treat until recently, but I fear it will be ripped open again as long as I'm in a male facility. I can't fathom how anyone can sleep at night knowing what they do to me and all the other transgender women. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And as a reminder for those who have just joined us, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 611. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. This is John Piro, Johnpiro, from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. And we'd like to thank Chair Scheibel for bringing this measure forward, and personally thank my friend Holly Wellborn for pushing this issue as well. There's definite steps that need to be taken, and this is a first step in the right direction for protecting transgender people behind prison doors. If we're going to incarcerate folks, we need to provide for their protection. And all this bill does is supplement and make the program better. It provides a mandate. And after hearing that last testimony, I don't know how we could not make a mandate to protect our transgender community behind bars. I don't know how we could not. So I please am asking this committee to please pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 085. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Alyssa Cortez, ALYSSACORTES. I'm the Program Associate for Silver State Equality, a statewide LGBTQ plus civil rights organization, and we are in full support of SB 258. This bill would ensure transgender people are provided an inclusive, gender-affirming, dignified, safe, and secure living environment. We know that failing to provide appropriate treatments can have serious implications on incarcerated patients' medical and mental health. That is why Silver State Equality supports SB 258, and we respectfully urge you to do the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 271. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hello, good afternoon, Senator Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Cy Bernabei, SYBERNABEI. I'm a transmasculine person and the executive director of Gender Justice Nevada, which is a local community-based organization that champions the rights of gender diverse people. We also facilitate trans ally trainings to increase awareness about who we are as gender diverse people and why inclusive care is literally life-saving. Anyone who would like to know more about those trainings could reach out to me and we can facilitate that conversation. Gender dysphoria is very real, but also very different for all trans people. For me, it caused immense depression, and I chose to have top surgery, which is a removal of breast tissue, to feel confident in my own body. As a trans person, I am scared to death of being incarcerated because of the statistical higher probability of physical, emotional, and sexual violence. And also not having access to gender-affirming health care would make me very depressed and loss of dignity. Just because you lose your freedom doesn't mean you lose all of your constitutional rights, and it doesn't mean that anyone should be subject to violence and lose medically necessary health care. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 673. Please press *6 to unmute. Then slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
For the record, Brooke Maylath, that's BROOKEMAYLATH, testifying on behalf of myself and only myself. This is an extremely important bill, and I'm very grateful for Senator Scheibel and Holly Wellborn of bringing this forward. It has stated some extremely important things. I think that it's also important to clarify some points in that the term transgender is a commonly used, understood term by the greater masses of the world, besides just those in the legal community. Trans coming from the derivative of the Latinate, meaning crossing over, as in crossing over gender. When we use the term cisgender, it means the same as in cisgender. Commonly used scientific terms from the Latinate that everyone should be, at this point in time, very, very familiar with. When we hear about this idea that DNA is supposed to be able to prove things once and for all, That is an extremely ignorant view. When we look at intersex people in particular, we see XY chromosomes going on with external female genitalia, quite often in terms of androgen insensitivity syndrome. There are multiple different conditions. There are over 70 different permutations of XY or XXY or XXX different kinds of chromosomes. So to come out with a statement that DNA is going to prove one biology or a different biology is simply fallacious. Again, this is a bill that is to be able to provide guidelines for staff and for inmates and their families, so that there can be an expectation of how treatment is supposed to be meted out, not like the willy-nilly, let's bend the rules because we have a policy that goes back 20 years and let's try to be able to bend it to our will or not follow certain things. And we'll change them Monday from Tuesday as to whether we're going to call somebody by a different name. No, this is about consistency, particularly about consistency for housing and consistency for treatment and consistency for medical care, which medical care needs to be done on an appropriate level for every individual, which, by the way, in order to be able to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, needs to be consistent, insistent, and persistent over a period of time, and is not a willy-nilly back and forth dog whistle of a buffoonish, bigoted statement that never ever happens unless you're in this fantasy state that it claims that the earth is going to come to an end because of gender dysphoria. So let's get away from the hate calls that have been happening, and let's concentrate on creating a consistent message for the community and treatment within the Department of Corrections that meets the federal guidelines, so that everyone has the possibility to be able to succeed under these things and not have this vagary that has been happening for years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Broadcasting, is there anyone else?
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. Caller with the last three digits, 318. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the Senate Judiciary. This is Kendra Birchie, KendraBertschy, and I'm with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office, and we urge your support of this bill. Fellow Nevadans are presently suffering under the current policies. This bill simply ensures that the policies are created to comply with the Constitution and Ninth Circuit case law. This is just one step to ensuring that those policies are enacted and then also followed, and ensuring that we don't have someone who just goes ahead and reduces the requirements or reduces the humane treatment that we should be providing to every single person who is in custody. We've already heard in this committee the problems that arise when regulations are not codified. Regardless of the person's circumstances, everyone in custody is a person who deserves to be treated humanely. The rights of every man, as John F. Kennedy said, are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. We urge your support.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Senator Orenshaw, there are no more callers to give support testimony at this time.
Thank you very much, Broadcasting. Broadcasting, if there's anyone in the queue who would like to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 258, please, we're allowing 2 minutes per speaker.
Thank you, Senator. If you'd like to give opposition testimony on Senate Bill 258, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, we are currently on opposition testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you'd like to provide opposition testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 859. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and maybe.
Good afternoon. This is Janine Hansen, Janinehansen. I am the state president of Nevada Families for Freedom. We oppose SB 258. In Section 5 of the bill provides that the director shall adopt standards in each institution, including the custody, security, and housing of offenders. Chair Scheibel stated that the reason for this bill is that we need a more robust policy. Holly Wellborn from the ACLU stated that keeping transgenders in isolation, solitary confinement is a major problem, and this will continue until new policies are put in place. I assume that means until this legislation, SB 258, is adopted and implemented. We heard testimony from an attorney that represents transgender clients, that transgender clients would love to be transferred to women's prisons. Yes, that is the goal. That is the goal of SB 258, to house transgenders in Nevada's women's prison. Will SB 258 mean that biological men will be housed with biological women in prisons? How will women be protected from rape and sexual abuse if biological men are housed with women in prison? How will biological women be protected from mental harm if they are housed with biological men in prison? How will this impact the physical and mental health of women in prison? If inmates can change their identified sex while in prison, does SB 258 give an incentive for biological men to claim to be transgenders in order to be housed with biological women? We heard testimony that there are between 4 and 50 transgenders in Nevada's prison system. There are 1,200 women as of in 2018 in Nevada's prison. How many women will be negatively impacted by being housed in prison with biological men? Please oppose SB 258. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. If you've recently joined us, we are currently on opposition testimony for Senate Bill 258. If you'd like to provide opposition testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 616. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Yes, this is Karen England with Nevada Family Alliance, KarenEngland, and I'm calling to oppose SB 258. I want to be clear that I am not opposed to inmates getting regular medical treatment or any kind of medical treatment. I sympathize with someone who is struggling with gender dysphoria. By no means do I oppose the portion of this bill that allows them to get medical treatment. But this bill goes way beyond that. Ms. Strickland talked about this with Senator Hansen's questions, and that self-identifying is the way that these prisoners get diagnosed. You know, we had a caller stating that there's a diagnosis. Well, this bill does not require a diagnosis whatsoever. They do not need to go through gender reassignment to be considered transgender, gender nonconforming, or gender nonconforming, but this regulation allows them to assert, to self-identify, and once they self-identify, per Ms. Strickland's testimony, they are allowed housing with the biology with which they identify with. Senator Harris mentioned that she has not heard of causes of any other inmates having harm with this idea that a biological male would assert himself to be a female and get to go into the female prisons. Again, I have compassion for someone that is struggling with gender dysphoria. However, the answer is not to infringe on the right to privacy and safety of the other prisoners, particularly the female prisoners that are going to suffer under this. They've already, testified that, so far there are no problems. Well, that's because they haven't really made this a far and widespread policy that this committee is currently considering. Please protect all inmates, including our female inmates, many of which are in prison because of abusive relationships, including sexual and domestic violence. So please do this for our women. Say no to this bill.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Senator Orenshaw, there are no more callers to give opposition testimony at this time.
Thank you very much, Broadcasting. Is there anyone in the queue who wishes to speak in the neutral position on Senate Bill 258? We're allotting 2 minutes per caller.
Thank you, Senator. If you'd like to provide neutral testimony on Senate Bill 258 at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, we are currently on neutral testimony on SB 258. If you'd like to provide neutral testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Senator Orenshaw, the phone lines are open and working. However, there are no callers to give neutral testimony at this time.
Thank you very much, broadcasting. Senator Scheibel, Ms. Wellborn, any closing comments, or shall I move on to your next bill?
In closing, I would like to thank the committee for their time and their consideration. I will also point out that this bill is, as we discussed during the question portion of the presentation, is somewhat broad. It doesn't say that the Nevada Department of Corrections has to house any particular person in any particular place. It says that the Nevada Department of Corrections has to develop a policy for determining where people ought to be housed and what kind of care they ought to receive. And every individual case should be evaluated individually. And that is in order to keep them safe. That is in order to keep the rest of the population safe. And that is in order to keep everybody's human dignity intact. And I think it's an important point for us to remember that when we paint with broad strokes, we end up with a mess. And we need to think about the individuals who are affected. And I can't imagine that it is easy to contend with gender dysphoria. I also can't imagine that it is easy to contend with being incarcerated. And so to do both at the same time sounds like an incredibly challenging time for any person to overcome. And so for us to make that more difficult is simply cruel.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel, for presenting the bill. Thank you, Ms. Wellborn. I appreciate your testimony on this important legislation. I'll now close the hearing on Senate Bill 258, and I will open the hearing on Senate Bill 332. And we are very lucky to have Chair Scheibel joining us on this legislation as well. Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel.
Thank you so much. And we are going to change gears quite drastically to talk about SB 332. And I also have some special guests with me to present this bill. I am joined by the Executive Director of the National Association of Structured Settlement Purchasers, J. Brian Deere, as well as an Associate Attorney for the National Association of Structured Settlement Purchasers, Jack Kelly. The purpose of SB 332 is to establish some regulations and require registration of organizations or companies that purchase structured settlement agreements. For those of you who don't know what a structured settlement agreement is, I certainly didn't until about 6 months ago. I will try to explain it the best that I can. It is a legal term of art that occurs or that exists in civil law generally when a plaintiff wins their lawsuit and they are awarded certain kinds of monetary damages or certain kinds of monetary awards. A structured settlement calls for the dispersal of those awards over a period of time. So perhaps if you're awarded $50,000, you get $10,000 per year for 5 years. A company that buys a structured settlement has the opportunity to provide the person who would normally be receiving those $10,000 per year a lump sum up front, which is probably not equal to the total sum that they are to receive, but the advantage is that they get to receive that sum earlier than the end of that 5 or 10 or 25 year period. Like I said, I have some guests with me to help explain the origin of the bill and the purpose of the bill and the nuances of structured settlements. But generally, I wanted to explain that the purpose of the policy is to ensure that here in Nevada, we only encourage or allow good actors to participate in this process by having them register with the Secretary of State, by creating some guidelines for what they are and are not allowed to do. And that way we can avoid having bad actors in the state who exploit people in need of quicker cash in these structured settlement purchase agreements. I also want to let the committee know that I did speak with representatives from the Secretary of State's office this morning, and I'm very, very appreciative to them for taking the time to speak with me. As you can see, the bill is lengthy and it is detailed, and we have not had the time to dive into it to the fullest depths, but I remain committed to working with the Secretary of State's office to work out any of their concerns or questions. And there's an amendment online on Nellis, which is relatively small. It makes some technical changes just based on the initial language, but there will be another amendment forthcoming, I anticipate, as we continue to work with the Secretary of State's office and any other stakeholders who we may not have had a chance to convene with, given the abbreviated schedule that we're on right now. But we will certainly continue to work with them, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to come up with a bill that satisfies the needs of all of the parties involved. And with that, Chair Pro Tem, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Kelly to walk you through the bill and probably do a much better job explaining what it does than I just did.
Thank you very much, Chair Scheibel. Good afternoon, Mr. Kelly. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for helping present Senate Bill 332 today.
Thank you, Senator Arnshaw and members of the committee. I would also like to thank the sponsor, the Chairman Scheibel, for her introduction of this very well-needed legislation. I am going to take 1 minute to give a little more breadth on the history of structured settlements. Structured settlements were created under federal tax law in the 1970s as a result of challenges that arose from issues like thalidomide babies. The anticipation of the House Ways and Means Committee at the time that we worked on this was that we created a system whereby we would allow for a period of money to be paid over a long, protracted period of time to be able to care for the long-term care or well-being of somebody who needed long-term care. As time went on in the 1980s and 1990s, this tax structure was then used by individuals settling claims to settle it for all sorts of civil litigation and all sorts of torts. It was no longer used for the long-term care purpose that had originally been written for. And as a result, a cottage industry emerged where people would have the opportunity to sell portions of this structured settlement. If you had a simple slip and fall, a consumer might be told, or a plaintiff might be told, we're going to pay you $100,000. And then they suddenly realize that the $100,000 may be paid over a 10-year period of time. And the money wasn't actually needed for long-term care. So Congress examined this issue in 2002 after the Victims Bill of 9/11 was written. And included in the Victims Bill at 9/11 was a provision that said that Congress says you can transfer structured settlements such as this. But there was one significant requirement that Congress would require. And that is that the transfer must be approved by a court of general jurisdiction, finding that the transfer was in the individual's best interest and also took into consideration the duties of their dependents. As that law was developed, it said that if a structure was purchased or transferred and it did not have such a court order, there would be a 40% tax penalty, excise tax on it. That was the purpose of the Structured Settlement Protection Act. And the key phrase here is Protection Act. This ensures that a court of general jurisdiction review the case to make sure it's in the person's best interest. In 2003, Nevada was very quick in getting a law adopted to address with this issue. But in 2004, the National Conference of Insurance Legislators adopted a model law. That model law has been amended and updated in 2004, 2009, 2012, and sometime in the near future will once again be updated. The legislation that Chair Scheibel has introduced today updates this legislation to the Model Act of the NCOIL and includes in it two additional areas which require registration, the posting of bonds, and some other limitations to ensure that bad apples cannot lay prey on individuals in this marketplace. Those adoptions were made by the state of Louisiana by the then chair and president of NCOIL 2 years ago. And today, as we speak, the Georgia General Assembly has adopted the new model with the updated changes you are considering today in its lower house, in the House. It has cleared unanimously through the Senate committee and presently was posted on the Senate floor agenda for enactment shortly this week. Let me first walk you through what this does. As I stated, it updates the law to reflect the current reflections in the NCOIL Model Act. It provides for much more robust consumer disclosures, including showing the effective annual rate that the person receiving the amount would receive. It precludes forum shopping. It requires that the individual's action be brought in their county of residence. This avoids such problems as somebody sneaking over from Sacramento into Reno and suddenly creating a false residency, just a forum shop, because the law might be looser now in Nevada than it may be in California or it may be in another state. It makes sure that you can't forum shop within the state, where you might have one court that is less familiar with this or more overburdened, and they don't spend the time and necessity to review these actions. But most of all, it requires registration. And that registration ensures that the state of Nevada knows who's doing business in their state. Presently, because this is a judicial procedure and a civil procedure, the state does not know who's doing business in their state. The court knows who's doing business before them, but the state does not know. That is the most important thing that is here today. It requires the posting of a bond of $50,000 so that if there is untoward behavior, the state has someone to turn to achieve it. And by doing this, it also impedes what is known as poaching or scraping by getting the identity of these companies. Let me walk you through briefly what poaching or scraping is. An individual files to have their structured settlement transferred. They could be doing it in Clark County. And bad apples will go over the court docket and find the name of the individual who has submitted their transfer. And they will call them up. And they will say, I am the ABC company. As you know, we're buying your structured settlement. You're supposed to be in court on Tuesday. We want to tell you, we're going to rework your deal, and we're going to give you a better price. So don't show up on Tuesday. Just work with us, and we'll give you a better price, and we're going to send you a gift card for $150 to make sure you do that. And then they structure it in a way that they might not even end up completing the transaction when the person goes to court. The person doesn't even know who they were doing business with. And when it all happens, nobody knows who did it or can find them. That's what the registration's all about. And it gives that individual the ability to be able to go after that person if they abuse it. That's the most important provisions that are here today. And I ask you to make sure that when you consider this, one question that some have raised, it was an interesting question raised in both Louisiana and in Georgia. It says, is this a burdensome task for an agency to have the registration? No, it is not. There are likely only 5 or 6 companies, honest companies, true companies that are well established that will register with the state. The bad apples won't register. The bad apples don't want you to know who they are. The bad apples don't want you knowing who owns the company and who it's all about. So that is the simplicity of this law. But at the same time, it brings us up to the current law that's needed today in Nevada to protect the citizens of Nevada. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I deeply appreciate your time and effort to allow me to appear before the committee today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. And Chair Scheibel, any other presenters, or would you like me to open it up for questions?
We can go ahead and move to questions.
Thank you very much. I see Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I love this bill. We've been dealing with structured settlements in tort cases for years, and they've always been difficult to keep on track. The only question I have is we're requiring registration through the Secretary of State, and it seems that we're leaving it to the court to decide whether or not the registrant has followed the law, which in at least one of my cases required a separate lawsuit. Is there a reason that we don't have this tucked up underneath the Department of Insurance or I'm sorry, Business and Industry somehow to manage this and to go after them? Or was it deliberate to leave it up to the courts and a separate action against them for those that misbehave?
So that's an excellent question, Senator. And one of the things that I'd like to note is that the technical amendments that were raised by Chair Scheibel one of the technical amendments says that you have to submit in your pleadings a certification or your attestation that you are in fact registered with the state. So the court does not have to bear the burden. In addition, there is a civil remedy here for a private right of action by the individual that they could pursue after that person. And if they do a transfer and it is not, they are not registered, the transfer and the contract is void ab initio, and the individual will get all their money directly transferred. So the money that the bad apple might have shown up front, like the $50,000 or something, they might pay that 50. But because the void ab initio is invoked, they would lose the stream of payments, and it would go back to the consumer. So the penalty would be to hurt the company and to benefit the consumer simultaneously. The court isn't overburdened because it's a proffer before the court of their evidence that they're registered.
And I appreciate that. I'm just thinking when we're talking about a private right of action, you're right. And that's exactly what, and it already exists arguably because they can go after them on a civil basis. But that private right of action under the statute still requires the recipient of that structured settlement to have to sue. It would mean a new lawsuit. And so I was thinking maybe if there was an administrative remedy that was available, that might speed things up. But I understand the bill.
That would be a burdensome remedy. The civil action would actually end up likely being brought by the company that the case was stolen from, fraud, and they would do it on behalf of the individual to gain the benefit for that individual.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Pickard. Senator Settlemyre.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate that information that's been going on with the testimony and the opportunity to ask a question. I was just kind of curious if I could ask Jack Kelly a question on the record. You indicated that if they fail to get the approval of local jurisdictions, that it would result in potentially a 40% capture, potentially capital gains loss through the IRS. Is that 40% of the total settlement or 40% of the amount that the individual was getting? Because some of these ones,
the individual doesn't pay the excise tax. The company who bought it without the court order would be subject to a 40% excise tax for the amount that they purchased. So if they purchased $50,000 worth of a settlement, they would then be subject to a 40% excise tax on that $50,000. So they would then be subject to paying $20,000 to the federal government. And that would, in effect, make the transaction upside down. They'd lose money on the transaction. That was the way Congress established it when they did the excise tax.
I appreciate that clarification. I was just trying to figure that out. Thank you.
No harm to the plaintiff at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Settlemyre. Members, any additional questions for either Mr. Kelly or Chair Scheibel? Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Broadcasting, if we can go to support. Anyone who'd like to speak in support of the bill? We are limiting callers to 2 minutes per speaker.
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. If you'd like to provide support testimony on Senate Bill 332, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, we are currently on support testimony for Senate Bill 332. If you'd like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Senator, at this time, there are no callers to give support testimony.
Thank you very much, Broadcasting. Broadcasting, is there anyone in the queue who would like to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 332?
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. If you'd like to give opposition testimony on Senate Bill 332 this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to give opposition testimony on SB 332, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Senator, there are no callers to give opposition testimony at this time.
Thank you, Broadcasting. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in neutral to the measure who wants to be heard? We're allotting 2 minutes per caller.
Thank you, Senator. If you'd like to give neutral testimony on S. Bill 332, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And caller with the last 3 digits, 340, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin. Once again, caller with the last 3 digits, 340, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Yes, this is Scott Anderson, Scottanderson. I am Chief Deputy Secretary of State for Secretary of State Barbara Sagaski. I would like to thank Senator Scheibel for taking our call this morning. When we received a fiscal note on this was the first fiscal note request. This was the first time we had seen this legislation or had anybody had reached out to us in regards to this legislation. We believe we understand what the legislation is trying to do. However, we're uncertain if the Secretary of State's office is indeed the correct office for this to be, whether there's another division within the Department of Business and Industry or financial institutions that would be better suited. We have talked with Senator Scheibel. I want to thank her for taking our call this morning, but we are uncertain as to whether it belongs in the office of the Secretary of State. There would be a fiscal impact, as this, even though it is a minor filing type or a minor number of filings, this is not generally a filing that we would do, and there would have to be requirements and other considerations which would have a fiscal impact on this office. Also, the statute itself does not give much guidance in regards to the information that would be required in such a filing or any other direction that way, other than on a form prescribed by the Secretary of State. So with that, we have been in contact again with the sponsor, and we would be more than happy to continue the discussions to determine whether this is a filing that does belong in the office of the Secretary of State or if it belongs somewhere else. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Deputy Secretary of State Anderson. I'm not seeing any questions from members. So I appreciate your willingness to work with the sponsor, and I think, but again, I'm not seeing any questions from members, and again, I encourage you to work with the sponsor and see if there's anything that needs to be ironed out or hashed out. Broadcasting, anyone else who is neutral to the measure who wants to speak?
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw. At this time, there are no more callers to give testimony in the neutral position.
Thank you, Broadcasting. I'd like to bring it back now for any closing by Chair Scheibel or Mr. Kelly.
The Chair will yield. I appreciate it in response to the concerns of the Secretary of State. That actually was raised in Louisiana and in Georgia. This is a very small group of participants in this marketplace. I would venture that at best, you would have 5 companies register. The bad apples don't register, and the companies that are well known to be well established in this marketplace are very happy to register. It is a very easy process. Louisiana had the exact same reaction as the Secretary of State's office did, and it's quite warranted when you think about it if you aren't familiar with it. But Louisiana found it to be one very simple process, and I feel confident that if if the Secretary of State of Louisiana was able to share with the Secretary of State of Nevada how simple it was for them, they will find it to be very easy to achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Chair Scheibel, and appreciate your willingness to work with Chief Deputy Anderson. And I will now close the hearing on Senate Bill 332, and I'll virtual gavel back to our chair. Thank you, Chair Scheibel.
Thank you so much, Chair Pro Tem Orenshaw. I really appreciate you bringing us through this meeting. And in case the record does not reflect that Vice Chair Cannizzaro is present, she is here, but Senator Orenshaw was doing such a fantastic job that we decided to leave the gavel in his capable hands. With that, we will move to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. Broadcast, is there anybody wishing to give a 2-minute public comment?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. If you'd like to provide public comment this afternoon, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, we are currently on public comment. If you'd like to provide public comment at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair Scheibel, the phone lines are open and working. However, there are no callers to give public comment at this time.
All right. Thank you so much for your help. That will conclude our meeting. We do have another meeting tomorrow at the same time, 1 p.m. Until then, we are adjourned.